Good afternoon, and welcome to another Research in Action brought to you by the Division of Research at Florida Atlantic University. With that, it is my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Dale Williams. Dr. Williams is a board recognized fluency specialist of the American Speech Language Hearing Association. He's also professor and chair of the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders at Florida Atlantic University. He has published three books and is about to publish a children's storybook later this year, and is also the coordinator of the FAU Stuttering Support Group. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Williams.
Hey, thank you very much, Karen. And I welcome everybody to my presentation. My presentation with two titles. I know some of you registered for the story of Joe Biden's stutter. That was changed to Stories of Stuttering, which was probably the case for some of you because the original title involved politics, sort of. The talk is not designed to be political, though I suppose I'll have to venture in that direction some. It originated because for the first time in US history, we have a president who stutters. That may not mean much to most people, but in my circles, it's all anyone's been talking about for the last 2 months. I first saw Joe Biden speak at the National Stuttering Association convention in Baltimore in 2004. High-profile people who stutter are often asked to speak at these events, and frankly, some are better than others. Some kind of go through the motions. As Mr. Biden entered the convention hall, flanked by two, I don't know, bodyguards, I guess, two guys in suits, and swaggered toward the mic, I fully expected this to be one of those go through the motion speeches. What I actually heard was a very personal story that included so many elements familiar to people who stutter. The anxiety, the teasing, the embarrassment, the shame. As was mentioned in my intro, I'm finishing up a children's book about stuttering right now, where we try to cover that entire childhood experience, and it's complex. Took me 28 pages to do that, though to be fair, I had to make the development of stuttering rhyme. Also, I had to come up with prose suitable of Susanna Brown's incredible artwork, which you can see. Well, you can see a collage of it behind me, and I threw some things on it that probably ruined it. So hopefully she's okay with it. Anyway, the point is, I heard all of that in Joe Biden's speech. Everyone that came away from that said, okay, this guy did experience it. This guy stutters. This guy gets it. What I did not hear at any point during that speech was stuttering. This raises a couple of questions. One, what is stuttering? In other words, what am I talking about here? And two, what is Joe Biden stuttering? So let's start with the first one. Stuttering is something that you can all recognize, probably not all of you can define. Most formal definitions include three types of speech breakdowns. There are part word repetitions. That means repetitions of sounds, or repetitions of entire syllables, where the units are repeated more than twice. There's also prolonged sounds. And then finally, there are tense hesitations in speech. Now, like any complex behavior, the definition doesn't completely capture the thing. It's 3.14 when we mean pi. What we create a grid that we can understand, and we lay it over the actual thing, and then we pretend like the grid is the actual thing. it's a pretty good definition what I gave you, but if somebody is talking like that, okay, most people would recognize that as stuttering, and in fact, that could be diagnosed as stuttering. But what I just did not fit the definition I gave you earlier. Even the behaviors are not as isolated as we like to pretend. If somebody does something like that, okay, is that a repetition? Is that a prolongation? Is that just, its own thing? But repetitions, prolongations, hesitations, pretty good way to look at core stuttering behaviors. In addition, there are secondary behaviors. Secondary behaviors are designed to hide the stuttering, more specifically to escape stuttering or avoid it altogether. So people who stutter will substitute words. They'll use interjections to delay the stuttering, help them through it. Sometimes they just stop talking. Kids are called on in class and they say, "I don't know," rather than stutter on the correct answer. There are eye blinks, finger taps. Sometimes people will slam a fist to help get a word out, and so many more. I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of these. Although these are secondary to the prime stuttering behaviors, they can take over the experience. I'm going to relate to you an incident that took place when I was 7th grade, so middle school age. So yeah, we're talking about this kid right here. We had a teacher named Mr. Finnick. Of course, we called him Fink, who liked to have us read sentences out loud. One day, Fink surveyed the opposite side of the room from where I was sitting, and he asked the first student in the first row to read sentence number 1 and identify, I don't know, the subject and verb, whatever the task was that day. The student, for reasons known only to her, read the sentence as fast as she could, which made everybody laugh. So Fink looked directly at the student behind her and said, "Can you read the next sentence any faster?" So he said, "The sign up for Little League took place in Dad's office." He just rattled it off as quickly as he could. So around the room it went, 7th graders reading sentences as quickly as they could. A clear row by row order of performance was established, and I knew I was going to be reading sentence 18. So I looked down at my textbook. Sentence 18 was Susan and her boyfriend both wanted to go. Okay, that was my sentence. And I got right to work. Okay, there were going to be 17 sentences before mine. So I had time to study the sentence and look for possible problem spots. What I learned that day was that if you look for something hard enough, you will find it. A possible rough spot could be the beginning of the sentence. Susan, the first word of the sentence, was not a particularly feared word, but starting a new sentence is a feared situation. So I had this weird sort of paradox at work here that allowed just enough doubt into my mind about being able to do this in front of the class. So I started to review possible strategies. What were my favorite secondary behaviors at the time? Well, I could use interjections. I could say, Susan and her boyfriend, but that doesn't really work under the circumstances, given that I'm supposed to be reading the sentence quickly. And when do we use interjections? When we're making word choices. Okay, well, I'm reading a sentence. There are no word choices to be made. Okay, so that one wasn't going to work. I used a lot of word substitution. Okay, so I could replace Susan with an easier word. But of course, that doesn't work either. The sentence is what it is. The class is going to be reading along. I've got to say the word that's there. I could not talk. I could fake an illness. I could grab the hall pass and run to the bathroom. The problem with that strategy was that by the time I thought of it, we were already along, sentence 14, sentence 15, something like that. And getting up and leaving, I would have made a real spectacle of myself. So I decided to try to figure out something else. This was not going well. I had to figure out a way past the first word, and I had to figure it out real quickly. After I got past the first word, I was reasonably certain I could slur my way through the rest of the sentence. Now, quick aside here. Notice that at no point during all this strategizing did I give a rat's behind what the actual subject and verb were. Okay, that never entered into my thinking. Okay, not only was I driving myself crazy, I wasn't learning anything on the way. Lousy think. Anyway, as we got to sentences 15 and 16, and they were read at lightning speed, I continued to reread sentence 18. I really wanted to find a foolproof strategy. I needed more time, but I also wanted this to desperately be over. By that point, my heart rate is just crazy fast. My nerves are frayed. Sentence 17 was started by the student seated in front of me. I had to think fast. So I came up with the following. Just as sentence 17 was being completed, I would begin that initial S sound in Susan, and I would draw it out very softly, just a. So by the time Fink nodded at me, all I had to do was raise the volume, complete the sound, and then the rest of the sentence. It required pretty exact timing, but hey, I was out of options and time. So by the time sentence 17 was about halfway done, I began with my at what I hoped was an imperceptible volume. I sounded like I'd sprung a leak, but at least I was doing something. I remember that my mouth was dry. I was gripping the sides of my desk hard. My hands were turning crimson. Okay, time out from the story for a second. Why was I working so hard to hide the stuttering? What's the big deal? Well, to answer that question, we have to go back to how it develops. Just like in Joe Biden's generation, parents at that time were told to ignore the stuttering and it would go away on its own. So stuttering was typically not talked about in households. A little better today, but there's still some of this going on. During early school age years, however, awareness of speech, awareness of stuttering, awareness of everything really increases. And stuttering children begin to show anxiety about their speech. Okay, by then, parents are still, for the most part, disregarding the stuttering. I mean, the kid will give the occasional piece of advice, slow down, wait and think about what you're going to say, usually delivered out of frustration. Those reactions serve to increase anxiety about speaking. The child quickly realizes that stuttering is wrong. So there's a lot going on here. We've got the child's shame. We've got a lot of guilt being carried by the parents. And we've got the probably a pediatrician's. That's where parents typically went with their first question. A pediatrician's original advice not to talk about it, okay, to just ignore it. So stuttering is not discussed within the household. As the child ages, he becomes progressively more pleased with this family pact, as he prefers not to think about it or talk about it. It's a despised condition by then. Of course, by that time, the stuttering is quite apparent. So the situation takes on an almost ridiculous tone as people ignore what's an obvious part of their daily experience. It's the emperor's new clothes in reverse. Everyone knows it's there, nobody acknowledges it. Because the topic is off limits at home, the child doesn't feel he can ask his disappointed parents for help. Unfortunately, this time of increased awareness of stuttering, its consequences, coincides with the ages during which teasing typically begins. A problem that only increases through grade school and then into and through middle school. So the child is also not going to confide in his peers about this thing. Okay, by then it's an embarrassing condition. So it's a child's problem to solve alone. And a lot of people will report that stuttering is a very lonely disorder that has a lot to do with how it develops. Okay, so I'm the stuttering child. I have to deal with this by myself. So bring on the secondary behaviors. Why? Hiding the stuttering feels like the most logical conclusion, the most logical way of dealing with it. Unfortunately, the effectiveness of secondary behaviors is only temporary. They don't last forever, but the temporary effectiveness is self-reinforcing. The social penalties associated with stuttering don't have to be paid if you can hide it from people. So you keep figuring out ways to hide it. So the secondary behaviors now are going to continue to increase. You're going to see more tensing of the facial muscles. You're going to see restructuring of sentences. Kids will describe a concept rather than using a feared word. I've heard of individuals faking foreign accents because they found that they could do that without stuttering. People order food in restaurants that they don't really want, but it's easier to say. They give themselves nicknames, purposely mispronounce words, and perform a number of other unusual behaviors, all for the sake of keeping the stuttering a secret. In some cases, these behaviors can significantly impact their lives, from being afraid to make new friends to turning down promotions. I know somebody who did that, a regular member of our support group, turned down a promotion because the new job would involve more speaking. Okay, notice the point to where shame has increased. The person who stutters is often unwilling to discuss this condition with anyone, family or otherwise. They're certainly not going to joke about it. It becomes this intensely personal aspect of their being. So yes, we can characterize stuttering by repetitions, hesitations, prolongations. In the final analysis, though, it's far more than momentary breaks of speech. Okay, it's embarrassment, it's mockery, it's loneliness, it's continual self-consciousness about speech. And it's a condition that seems to be mysterious enough that it's outside of conscious control. Okay, so metaphorically speaking, stuttering is not just another branch on the tree of life. It's more like a seasoning. It's a spice that flavors all other ingredients in the mix. Okay, so what does all this have to do with Joe Biden? Well, I'll say that old habits die hard. Let me show you a clip that I play for my my fluency disorders class every year. If I can find the shared screen. Okay, here it is.
But you've been a very busy man. Do you and Mrs. Biden ever get to the movies? Academy Award picks? Any favorites among the Oscar nominees?
Hang on a second. I think I forgot to share sound. Oh, no, I didn't. Okay. I'm better at this than I thought I was.
As a matter of fact, we do. I think the one of the odds-on favorites, Jill didn't go with me, but is this new program that I looked at it and wished I was seeing it in 3D. And you sit there and you watch this science fiction thing unfold in front of you. I think Avatar. The magic of it is kind of overwhelming. There are some other real good ones out there, but I predict Avatar will win.
All right, we'll hold you to that.
Vice President Tom Hoffman, we love having you here. Thank you very much.
Nice to meet you. Thanks.
Okay, why not just say the name of the movie? Hang on, let me make sure that stopped. Okay. Okay. Why not just say the name of the movie? In talking around it so much, he didn't really present himself very well. But in the mind of the person who stutters, anything is better than stuttering. Tries to make it look like he forgot the name, just couldn't come up with it right away, and may have been successful. I mean, the title of the video is Joe Biden has no idea what Avatar is. Anyone who stutters, who watches that, immediately says, oh, he was going to stutter on that word. Oh, he was on the spot. He had to figure out something else to do. That is a clear use of secondary behaviors to avoid a stutter. Now, before we move on, let me just tell you, I'm not forgetting who we're talking about here. Is every misstatement attributable to stuttering? No, it is possible to both stutter and be a gaffe machine. Certainly Joe Biden has had his share of comments where, you know, we've listened and thought, yeah, Joe, you probably should have counted to 10 before you said that. Some examples. Let's see.
You have called yourself a gaffe machine, okay? Do you, in the last few weeks, you've confused New Hampshire for Vermont, said Bobby Kennedy and MLK were assassinated in the late 70s, assured us I'm not going nuts. Follow-up question, are you going nuts?
Look, the reason I came on the Jimmy Kimmel Show is because I'm not. I mean,
but there are also other times that I would argue that what you're seeing with him is clearly a secondary behavior. Let me try an example of that.
Conversion of the road to Damascus. Because now you say, by the way, are you going to stick with the president on the following president, the last guy on this issue? And just start naming them, whatever it is.
President,
last guy, President Last Guy. I don't know that's what his name was. So that was one event. Now, people are going to write this off. They'll say,
okay, sorry, I didn't get that one shut off in time. Forgetting Barack Obama's name is something that he did at least twice on the campaign trail. Did he actually forget the name Obama? It seems far more likely to me anyway that that was a use of a secondary behavior. He was going to stutter on the name, so he just came up with the last guy, which is that necessarily better? Maybe not from the outside, but again, in the mind of the person who stutters, yeah, I didn't stutter. So I see Joe Biden's pattern as bigger on secondary behaviors than primary behaviors. In other words, he's pretty good at hiding the stuttering. I don't say that as a compliment, and I'll explain why in a couple of minutes. Part of his persona is he's a guy who recovered from stuttering. And yes, people can define recovery any way that they want to, but the implication is that he beat it. He put it in his rearview mirror. That is not the case. And certainly it's great that somebody who stutters can be president. It's admirable that he reaches out to help others. If you watch the Democratic convention, you saw the 11-year-old boy, Braden Harrington, talk about how Joe reached out to him. Great thing, great story. Enjoyed listening to it, enjoyed watching Braden. However, one could argue that the use of those secondary behaviors is not the best example he could set. Why? Because the use of secondary behaviors is a dangerous game to play. Most of the time, I would say 90+% of the time, use of those behaviors makes the disorder worse. With stuttering, there's this classical conditioning thing going on here, but what's linked is not meat powder and salivation. I mean, that's the only classical conditioning example anybody knows. What's linked here is stuttering, okay, and all the negative consequences that accompany it with new words and situations. For example, a child who substitutes words as a secondary behavior might have to say the word car, but knows he's going to get caught up, knows that's going to be a big stutter. So he says, let me solve this by saying automobile. Now, I want to go for a ride in your automobile. Remember, these behaviors only work temporarily. What he's done basically is put automobile into the stuttering slot of that sentence. And there's a very real possibility, there's a really good chance that in time, the child's going to have difficulty with the word automobile. Okay, now I can't say car, I can't say automobile. let me go to vehicle. Okay, a little awkward. I mean, people don't use that, but again, any kind of weirdness like that is better than stuttering. Vehicle will stop working. So then I go with ride. Then maybe I have to use the make and model of the car. You know, then I mean, there's a finite set of synonyms for car, but you know, there are several possibilities there. My point is that by the use of secondary behaviors, by the use of word substitution, the child has turned one problem word into half a dozen or more problem words. Okay, he's actually made the condition worse. So what should he do instead? Well, ideally, stutter openly like Braden Harrington did. That classical conditioning thing can work the other way too. If you face your fears, feared words, feared situations, you can break the associations with stuttering. You can break the trigger and actually stutter less, actually stutter on fewer words, fewer situations. Stuttering's not in its origin a learned behavior, so you're not going to completely get rid of it that way. But you can have an easier time communicating by facing up to these fears. But you have to be willing to stutter. And in that sense, stuttering is a very cruel disorder. It doesn't really go away until you stop caring about whether it's going to go away. Okay, let's return to 7th grade English class. When we last left our hero, he was gripping the sides of his desk and he was making a sound out of his mouth. Unfortunately, at that point, Teacher Fink said, boy, you kids can talk fast, or who do you think was the fastest so far, or I don't know what he said, but whatever it was, it completely threw off my timing. Okay, I used up all my air, I had to plug the leak, I had to catch my breath. Then he said, okay, let's see, where are we? Oh yeah, and he looked directly at me. So I looked down at my textbook, which by the way was ridiculous by then because I had sentence 18 long since memorized. And in a loud and clear voice, I said, Susan and her boyfriend both wanted to go. Well, the class just exploded in laughter. Even Fink started laughing, and when the students noticed that, they laughed even louder for what seemed like hours, probably a few seconds. Okay, then the rest of the day, I had to hear people passing me by in the hallways going, okay, so not a great day. Now, I don't tell that as a woe is me story. I'm trying to make a point here. How do you tell that kid that the key to communicating successfully is to stutter openly? Take it from me, he's not listening. It's the last thing he wants to hear. It's the last thing he's going to do. So how do we get there? Well, it takes time. It takes commitment. The last textbook I wrote, actually the image is at the top of one of the trees in my background. This mirror image thing drives me crazy. Anyway, it's at the top of that tree. Not that important. Anyway, my co-author is a stand-up comedian who works the London circuit. He's a stand-up comedian who stutters. He hid his stutter as well as he was able into adulthood. Now he gets up on stage and stutters in front of audiences, in nightclubs, in front of nasty drunks. You know, that's a tough thing to do. That's very admirable. but he can tell jokes about stuttering. Is that kind of openness realistic for a full contact sport like politics, where campaigns get nasty, where they get really personal? I don't know. Maybe that's the worst profession for somebody who stutters. I mean, the jokes are always about the stuttering auctioneer, the stuttering pilot, the stuttering air traffic controller. I know individuals who've done all three of those jobs. Okay, and people know they stutter, they get along just fine. With politics, there's another consideration. There is a stereotype associated with stuttering that says people who stutter are shy, they're introverted, they're reserved, they're reticent, a whole bunch of other words that basically mean wallflower. This stereotype does not fit with being a leader, which is the image any politician wants to project. For a politician to stutter openly with a, I don't care what you think, attitude, I don't know, it's possible as a society, we're not quite there yet. Anyway, I hope you have a better idea of what stuttering is, what people who stutter go through, what kind of experience history they have, what they go through on a daily basis, and how I perceive what's going on with our current president and his speaking style. I will be very happy to take any questions now.
Thank you very much, Dale. Just as a reminder, if you have any questions for Dr. Williams, please post them in the Q&A box that you can access it by hovering your mouse in the bottom of your screen. There is a Q&A button that you can click and type your question in. All right, Dale, first question. One of our attendees is a stutterer that ran for locally elected public office and was elected mayor. So just as an FYI, it can happen. So to your point, it can happen. So you mentioned in your presentation that there are certain words. Is it always the stutter always related to certain words that you pause on or you can verbalize quickly enough?
Like most questions having to do with stuttering, there's never a quick answer. You're always delving into gray areas. Stuttering is typically looked at as word specific or situational. Most of the time, people's speech pattern has elements of both. So there are certain situations that tend to trigger it, certain words and sounds. But it's possible somebody can be purely situational. And you ask them, what are the tough sounds for you? What are the tough words? I don't know. I don't really have any. It just tends to occur more when, I don't know, talking to certain people, talking in groups, talking to authority figures, whatever their difficult situations are.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. So you mentioned that children's book that you're about to publish. One of our attendees, her daughter, is a speech pathologist, and she's asking if this children's book would be good to have for her children.
Oh, well, I'm the author of the book, so of course my answer to that is going to be of course. Yeah, no, actually, I will say at the risk of sounding immodest, we have had the book read by a lot of speech pathologists and a lot of parents of children who stutter, and the feedback has been really good. This has to be in every school library on the planet, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think the idea is that it can be read to children, children who become old enough to read and are still reading picture books can read it to themselves, and hopefully, like with any other children's book, with enough readings, they begin to get the message of not talk fluently, but the message of acceptance. Okay, maybe stuttering is not going to be a lifelong problem, but sometimes it is, and learn to accept your speech.
And I was just going to ask you that, Dale. How do you teach a child, especially, children, as you mentioned previously, can be quite cruel, as they're teasing and making fun of each other. How do you teach a child to just accept him or herself the way they are, right, with the stutter, and not, try and force them to get over that?
Yeah, it is a challenge, and it's real important for the speech pathologist to lead the way on that sort of thing. If if I'm seeing a child and I say, let's go out and talk to people, let's go out and stutter in front of people, or let's go out and try a new technique in talking to people, I really have to do it first. And I really have to exaggerate it. I'll go up to the first person and I'll talk like that, just a lot of struggle. Okay, the next person is going to be your turn. Just mention real quick, a friend of mine, he worked as a speech language pathologist in a public school, and he had a group of children who stutter, and they would walk around the school and do that. And they, listeners would react in various ways, and then they would talk about, they would discuss, sometimes make fun of the reactions they got. And it was a really effective way of turning the table and saying, okay, stuttering is cool. We're the cool ones here. That person who reacted that way, that was a lousy reaction. That was something that they shouldn't have done. Does it always work? No. I mean, I think most of the time we work toward that and we do a pretty good job. But sometimes we have to tell the parent, look, this is this may not be the time for therapy. If you're only going to use the therapeutic techniques inside the treatment session, then we haven't done anything for you. Right. You can do wonderful things here, but you can't anywhere else. We can't do our jobs, and maybe you're not ready for therapy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, another question here. Have you seen any case of stuttering go away suddenly as a result of a dramatic experience for the stuttered person?
Yeah, there is spontaneous recovery with adults. It's really, really rare. I mean, look at the research literature. There's a handful of case reports on this. And at a meeting of stuttering specialists one time, a woman stood up and said, I stuttered my entire life. I was in my 50s. And then one day it was just gone. And I'm here because I want to know what happened. And a room full of experts were like, I don't know. That's kind of the nature of the beast. Weird things can happen. The case report that comes to mind when you say that, a woman, I've met her a couple times. She's pretty active in the stuttering support community. She stutters quite severely, and she was in a car accident. Had a closed head injury, not severe, but she was hospitalized for a time, and for several weeks, her speech was completely fluent, not a hint of stuttering. Now, she says she knew it was always there. She knew it was just lying in wait, and it was going to come back. But everybody came to visit her and said, I can't believe how you're talking. This is the strangest thing. I mean, she couldn't get through a single sentence without stuttering. Now everything is free flowing. And then sure enough, probably 2 months later, she was right back where she was in the first place. So, you know, it's the human brain. You know, weird things happen.
Right. Each time you begin a sentence, do you take a deep breath before speaking?
No. I do, you know, pretty much what anybody else does. You either, you know, take a breath and use your air to talk, or your brain tells you got enough air. Go ahead and say this. There is a school of thought in therapy that basically teaches that you know, before you say anything, you take a full breath so that you can ease into the words that you're saying. And, you know, for some situations, I think that can be effective, but it wasn't the kind of therapy I went through. And frankly, I think there are some limitations with that kind of therapy.
Completely different question, Dale. Is stuttering related to dementia?
Stuttering, both can occur. Adult onset stuttering can occur along with dementia. Do they happen together? They can, but they don't necessarily. Stuttering is not a symptom of dementia. You know, it's like you know, again, back to the human brain. Things can happen in all different combinations. What I've been talking about today is developmental stuttering, starts in preschool years, and that's completely separate. I suspect the question was getting at, you know, could Joe Biden's behaviors be explained by dementia? And there's just too many common threads in his story to stuttering to think that it's anything else.
Can you talk a little bit more about the reasons behind why some people stutter? And then also there's a follow-up question here, whether a 78-year-old can change old habits like that.
Well, the first question is easy. Why do people stutter? The answer is nobody knows. It's probably a multi-factor cause. They're doing, I mean, it is something neurological, but people who stutter don't show repeated or prolonged movements in anything else they do. So we're talking about something that is a microscopic difference. It's not going to show up on a CAT scan. It's not going to show up on a PET scan. You know, we don't know where it is. There's a lot of research being done in this area. It's also possible it's not the same place in you know, brains across people who stutter. So yes, neurological cause. And now I talked some about conditioning, so I just want to make sure we're clear on what the difference is there. Root cause, something different in the system, something different in the neurological system. But if you look at childhood stuttering, it looks like that. There's not the tension. There's not a lot of secondary behaviors. By the time that kid is an adult, it looks like that. Okay, so everything that's put on top of it are learned behaviors. Mm-hmm. But you can't teach a non-stuttering person to stutter. Okay, there has to be the root cause there. I just want another thing that jumped into my head in some of the pharmaceutical research. They're looking a lot at the neurotransmitter dopamine, the brain substance, and we know that it does affect speech. and the fast speech associated with schizophrenia, for example, has been explained by increases in dopamine, the slow plodding kind of speech of Parkinson's disease, lack of dopamine or reduced amounts. So looking at dopamine blockers, it appears there's some promising research being done there. So that might be a key. But that's I talked a lot there and basically said I don't know.
Okay. Fairly simple questions. Are there support groups for adolescents who stutter?
Yeah, in fact, there's a local one, a really good one. It's run by Liz Blake in North Palm Beach. And who's ever interested, if you contact me, I'll give you Liz's email address. But they meet pretty regularly. I mean, I'm sure they're meeting via Zoom now. But yeah, another thing, you can go on the National Stuttering Association website. There are TWIST groups, Teens Who Stutter, TWST. There are TWIST groups that are listed, and you can find one in your area. I'm assuming you're somebody local. Liz Blake's is going to be the one in your area.
Great, thank you. And yes, at any given time, you can contact Dr. Williams or myself, and I'll get you in touch with Dr. Williams for any follow-up information for sure. So another question here, Dale, you focused a lot on the secondary behaviors that people develop to avoid stuttering and how difficult it can be to help someone be willing to stutter openly. Can you talk a bit more about the role of counseling the role counseling plays when helping young people to, be okay with the stutter, to stutter openly, basically?
Yeah, counseling is a huge part of stuttering therapy, and a lot for that reason. Now we're not trained as counselors, so a lot of it is active listening, brainstorming, simple sorts of things like that. But yeah, it's a very insightful question because there's a recognition there of okay, you have to go out and stutter openly. Well, I don't want to do that. People say, I came to therapy because I want to stop this. Why are you making me do this more? And okay, you have to overcome your fears. You have to be able to confront this. People understand, but that doesn't mean they want to do it. It becomes this theory of 1,000 impacts thing where you keep bringing it up, but you guide them toward this. It has to be a good idea in their mind, because if I say go out and stutter openly, well, if it goes well, then the person thinks I didn't solve my problem. This person solved it for me. If it goes poorly, then it's okay. This person's an idiot. He gave me bad advice. So they have to really take ownership of that idea, and a counseling framework is a big part, especially with adolescents and adults. I mean, so much of each session is counseling.
There's a follow-up.
Just a quick thing on the previous question. You mentioned something I just kind of talked right over, but there was a 78-year-old person who asked if there's anything she can do now. Was that the question?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. I mean, there's no bad time to start therapy. I would start therapy with somebody who is a specialist in the area, and who will get at not only the speech, but also the negative attitudes, also the secondary behaviors. People trained a little more in getting at the entirety of the disorder.
Great. We're almost out of time. I'm going to leave us with one more question, Dale. If I know we still have more questions, so we will ask our presenter to answer them offline. We will post the remaining answers together with a recording of today's presentation on our website, which you can find at FAU Research in Action. If you Google that, you should be able to find it. Dale, the last question for today is related coming back to counseling and being okay with the stutter. This becomes even worse or even harder if you have a child with a stutter, but then the parents don't want to accept the stutter, don't want the child basically to accept the stutter. Do you have any advice on, for that?
Well, if it's a small child, say it's a preschool child, therapy in that case is going to be designed to stamp out the stuttering, to get rid of it altogether. So in that sense, the parent is right. That's what they can be looking for. If it's an older school-age child, if it's an adolescent, that becomes less likely. And so, yeah, I mean, talk about the theory of 1,000 impacts. A lot of parent counseling goes into that as well. Now, if you can manage the stuttering, that's not to say that you can't learn techniques to improve your fluency, but those techniques are probably not going to work across the board. There are probably going to be some situations in which you can use those. I mean, if I'm giving a speech and I'm the only one talking, there's really no communication pressure on me. If I choose to talk this way, knowing that I'm not going to stutter, that's perfectly, I'm okay doing that. No one's going to be interrupting me. No one's going to be finishing my sentences. It's not going to work as well if you join a group discussion and everybody's talking 100 miles an hour.
Great. Thank you so much for being with us, Dale. Very interesting. I think we all have a much greater appreciation for and how hard it is for people who stutter to be accepted. So with that, thanks everybody who was able to attend. We hope to see you again next week. Thanks, Dale. Have a great
day. All right, thank you, everyone.